Washington's force came upon the presumed hostile troops just as dawn was breaking. The French, camped in a narrow defile overhung by sheer rock walls and higher ground, were just arising, some of the men still in their blankets. Fred Anderson, author of A Crucible of War, the premier work on the French and Indian War, devotes the entire foreword in his book to describe what happened. Paraphrasing his words, Washington set about deploying his men along the high ground, looking down into the French camp. The sun was just rising, and a French sentry spotted movement, raised his rifle and fired, alerting the French to an attack and killing one of the British militia. With this shot, the Virginians opened fire in a volley directly into the cramped spaces of the French camp. After a sharp exchange of mere minutes, the French raised a white flag of surrender. Washington, Gist, Van Braam, and the Half-King and some braves went down into the glen to parley. The French commander, Ensign Coulon de Jumonville, wounded and lying on the ground, asked why the British had fired upon their peaceful group. When accused of moving to assault the Brits, the French officer replied that they had simply been on a diplomatic mission, carrying a message for the governor in Williamsburg. He produced an official document, purportedly to that effect. Written in French, the paper did nothing to ease Washington's mind. He had no French, and he caucused with Gist and Van Braam, his interpreter, poring over the document. While Washington was engaged, Tanaquarison confronted the wounded Frenchman, saying, "Thou art not dead yet, my father." The term father was ironic. In the Indian culture, they referred to most European officers as my father, as one who would lead them and teach them. But it is also relevant that the Half-King's father, formerly a chief of the Seneca, had been killed by a French-led Indian party. Tanaquarison had a long-standing enmity against the French. Upon speaking those words, the Indian killed the French officer with a tomahawk blow to the head, whereupon the other Indians attacked the remainder of the French wounded, killing all 10. They would have killed the remaining 22 prisoners in the same action, but Washington stopped the massacre. His intention was to return them as prisoners to Williamsburg, as sources of intelligence against the French. This so-called Jumonville affair, or the affair Jumonville Glen, named for the French officer, occurred on May 28, 1754. It was the opening shots of the French and Indian War. Washington, realizing they were only a small band deep in enemy territory, ordered a roundup of the prisoners and a move out for Great Meadows. In taking count, they found only 21 French prisoners. One had disappeared. One young private, half-dressed and barefoot, escaped the formation and ran 60 miles barefoot back across mountains and rocks and forests to Fort Duquesne to spread the alarm. Once his absence was realized, Washington hastily retreated to Great Meadows. There he urged on his men to complete the defensive positions, assuming the French forces would be close on their heels. In fact, it was some 5 weeks before the French appeared. But even so, the Virginians had little to work with. Colonel Fry and the remainder of the expedition had not come. Tools were scarce, food and medicine critically low, and heavy rains hampered their work. Under the threat of retaliatory assault, Washington knew he must rapidly build a defensive position. They erected a small log stockade 53 feet in diameter, and inside one small shed 14 feet square under a skin and bark roof in which to store their meager food, gunpowder, and a few kegs of rum. Most of the defenses were trenches dug outside the stockade. These quickly became pools as the swampy ground and continuing rain filled them to the chest of their defending militiamen. But they hunkered down and waited in what they appropriately named Fort Necessity. They were short of food, medicines, gunpowder, almost everything but rain, and Dinwiddie's promised resupply was still just a promise. They waited 5 weeks.